of things that we're doing, but our DEI team also engages on a construction careers pathway program. And I'll stop after this, but it's really important because there's a lot of capital construction going on in the region, and what we've done is we've organized all of the public entities within the region, from school districts through to the port and the transit district and ourselves, and all of the cities, to basically say we need to set the standard for apprenticeship hours so that we can get people through to journeyman level. And it is specifically for women and minorities, to make sure that there's a safe place, not just to learn, but on the construction job itself. Do you actually have a safe place to work? What tools do the construction companies need to keep you and move you on, and make sure that you have a family wage job at the end of the day?
Thank you very much, Lynn. Greg, how's it going in Seattle? I know you've been there for a year?
2 years.
2 years already. It's flown by. So in Seattle, how does your agency foster equity?
So, something that really attracted me to this opportunity, 2.5 years ago, was that the Seattle Department of Transportation had recently published a transportation equity framework, and it included 200 very specific tactics on how we could embody equity in planning, design, and construction. And that was informed by an outside group called the Transportation Equity Work Group. So like you, Lynn, we have an outside group advising us with representatives from a variety of underserved communities. And then we have, we're well-resourced to have like about 4 to 6 staff at any given time working on these topics. But I thought that like codifying how we would do it was a really interesting asset, for me coming into the agency. And it had only been published, the Transportation Equity Framework, like a matter of months before I arrived. And so I decided that I was going to be the person to sort of operationalize that framework. And something I've been seeing more and more of that I'm very proud of is this idea of bringing the table to people who don't even know there's a table. Finding a way to bring people into advisory and consultation and decision processes who never even knew that there was an opportunity to get involved, and doing it in language, in culturally relevant ways, in the physical places where people already are, rather than putting a microphone up on a Tuesday night at 7 p.m. at the rec center. And that has been really, really exciting, and part of what I'm trying to do as a leader is like celebrate when that happens at SDOT, and hold those moments up as best practices to be replicated.
Well, let's stay with you for a second, because you just had a really huge, successful transportation levy to support your infrastructure. It sounds like you got 8 years of solid investment funding. So there was a coalition. Can you explain a little bit? Maybe it sounds like that work that you had been doing for 2 years prior was really setting the table for a large coalition to build up and support like bike groups and labor unions and a lot of different partners. Was that the key to the measure passing? Or was it big?
Yeah, an interesting thing we have in Washington State, the state kind of caps how much you can raise property taxes as a locality. And so the property tax revenue keeps shrinking compared to sort of inflation. And so municipalities end up like making surtaxes to pay for different things. We use the word levy to describe that. So there's been 2 transportation levies already. The first one was like $300 million. The second one was $900 million over 9 years. And I got there at the end of year 7, and only half the money had been spent. So like the first order of business was to like initiate the remaining 150 projects that were stuck in design or community outreach, because you can't get more money if you haven't spent the money that you have. And then after that, the next mission was to frame up a new levy, and we decided to go much bigger. We took the existing levy, we adjusted it for inflation, and then we went 30% bigger. So instead of $105 million a year in revenue, it'll be like 175. And we decided that sort of like, we call it the sort of triple big strategy, that we were going to put it on the ballot on the high turnout presidential election year, where we're going to have a lot of renters, car light or car free households, and youth voting. We were going to build this really big coalition, all spanning all the way from the Port of Seattle, which represents freight, all the way over here to Disability Rights Washington and the Cascade Bike Club, and everybody in between. And then a really interesting moment was I did a listening tour in January, knowing that we would have to bring a proposal forward in April. And I went to a bunch of community organizations that weren't used to interacting with SDOT. And many times people told me, no, the SDOT directors never come here. No executive from SDOT has ever set foot in this office before. And I was able to distill down the comments to like a simple message back to my staff. Is representatives from underserved communities said the two things they need from us is they need a consistent point of contact that doesn't change over the years, and they need multi-year funding. They said, you're a project-based organization, you show up, you want to do something, we mobilize to try to advise you and interact with you, and then you leave. And they wanted to be in relation with us. So I'm very pleased to say that within the new levy, there's $100 million in funding for community-directed investments.
Awesome.
And we're going to create these geo-reps, these like SDOT folks who will face certain neighborhoods over many years. And they won't just spend down this pot of money, but can make connections to other projects and programs that we have that could be relevant to those communities.
I think that, first of all, that's super exciting. It's an amazing model that you're setting up there. And one of the things, Dawn, I wanted to ask you about is in your Akron, Ohio agency, which is, we were comparing notes about sizes and stuff, but how, when you were talking about this chief culture officer, you changed your URL to just message to your users, you are why we exist. In fact, they changed their URL to yourmetro.org.
Yeah, your Metro Bus.
Yourmetrobus.org. And I think what it did was it messaged to the customers, your customers, that you're our most important user, that we care about what you think. Can you share with us how you take these planning policies and really reflect kind of the equitable priorities that you have established?
Yeah, sure. So what we do is throughout my career, I know that a lot of transit people have always chased, as we talked about, what you call the choice rider, right? First of all, I don't know why you call them the choice rider, because it makes it sound like they're better than everybody else, and they're not. They're the same. It's a person that gets to ride. So what we did is we focused on what we call the transit loyal passenger. That was the first thing we did. We coined the phrase. We call them our transit loyal passengers, and we went out and started talking to them. And you know, this is a place that I started at as a bus operator almost 40 years ago. I'm really old, and now. I came back after being in Tennessee for a few years, and I come back as the CEO. And one of the things that just was really shocking to me is nobody was out there talking to the passengers. So I got on the bus all the time, still to this day. I ride the bus 2-3 times a week, and I'm talking to the passengers when I do it. And I would ask them, I expected to hear them say, this is terrible, or this route is awful, or, you know, this bus operator is mean to me, whatever it is they want to say. And instead, what they said to me was, no, everything's good, we just want more. And so what we did was we really looked at our resources, and we did a network redesign, which I know a lot of people are doing now, but this is something we hadn't done in 20 years. So once we did that, we looked and we actually went out and asked people, where do you want to go? We sat in our transit centers and talked to them. We rode the bus with them and talked to them. And we said, where is it that you want to go? I didn't go out and ask all the politicians. I didn't go out and ask, you know, all the folks that don't ride the bus, where do you think the bus should go? And I didn't tell them where it should go. We listened to them, and what they wanted was more, and they needed it in the places that were most dense. So in changing everything, and after 20 years, we really focused on those routes that work and where people wanted to go. We took our routes from 1 frequent route to 5 frequent corridors. And once we did that, that was about 18 months ago. And in the first 12 months, our ridership went up 30%. And yeah, that wasn't from going out and finding new riders. That's just from giving people what they wanted so that they could ride it more often.
So it's a whole paradigm shift between getting the discretionary rider to choose the option for transit versus reinvesting and doubling down on your existing ridership and having them have more access, which is a great, I mean, it's a great approach. And I think to me, it makes so much more sense. And, you know, Lynn, as the only elected member here, which is a whole different level, LA County, as you all know from Los Angeles, we're about to, I think in 2031, have an elected CEO for the county. That's going to be a tough, big job. So we pray for that person today. But Lynn, as the only elected regional agency leader, how do you think about the delivery around equitable priorities at Metro? How do you work with your partners? How do you guys actually make that a focus?
Yeah, it's a daily conversation, and I feel like I just sit on making sure we're making progress as a region and bringing along individual mayors, individual city councilors, individual county commissioners, individual business folks. You have to sit on the vision, right? And find ways to include everybody in that. And I think that's where we mostly struggle, because it is actually easy to say, we'll just help this 5% of the population. We're just going to focus on this. It's what's hard is to actually say how you're going to help everybody. And I think we're in this moment, honestly, in the United States, where we have to figure out how to talk about how we help everyone. And I think that's where your messaging is so beautiful, is that you're not leaving everybody out. We cannot be exclusive by being inclusive. And I'm on my soapbox, but this is where I struggle, because we are ballot measure driven at the regional government. We have a very small, tiny tax base for just administrative, and everything else is ballot measure driven. So I need the electorate, the voters, the taxpayers to see a rate of return. But yet I still need to make sure that everybody who has not had a seat at the table has a seat at the table. I need to grow the table. I also need to make sure that we can pass stuff. So it's a constant struggle between the purity of what the staff would like to see, honestly, and where we need to be able to practically get the funding that needs to benefit everyone. But I think it's defining the benefit for everybody that we need to be more engaged on. But I think, let me just give a quick example of what it means to sit on this. Is I don't know how many of you followed the I-5 Rose Quarter project in Portland, but it'll be our first lid over I-5 right downtown. It is the place where the amazing amount of public infrastructure was built and moved out the Black community. And what we're trying to do is work with a nonprofit that was created to bring culturally diversity back into and create intergenerational wealth as part of the overall land use and transportation plan for that area. And it is all CBO led. But the project for the I-5 cover started to go south, and all the electeds left the table except me. And the reason I stayed is because I knew I had to sit on these values and make sure that the state DOT and other partners would still come to the table and still have this message of leadership to set the standard. So it was very lonely for a good year. But they all came back.
They all came back? That's good.
But somebody had to be at the table to get others back to the table and diversify the conversation. So anyway.
Well, it sounds really hard, but it does test these kinds of hard decisions, test everybody, particularly in your roles at the top of these agencies in terms of like sending the message that this does count, that these things are important to us. And so I want to ask about kind of how you measure outcomes. How are you going to be measuring outcomes in terms of, gaining equitable kind of those goals that we all want to have? How do you measure them? Because I think KPIs are part of this conversation. You got to, if you want to get a ballot passed, you got to show you improvement. If you want to get folks behind a movement, you've got to show improvement. Otherwise, they're like, why are we going to do that? So Don, maybe we could start with you in terms of just how do you measure? Well, maybe you do just by saying that 30% more people are riding your system from 1 year ago. Is it ridership?
Yeah, I mean, I think ridership is always important. I mean, when you're in transit, that's how everybody else says whether you're doing what you're supposed to do. I don't think, though, that it's the only measurement, because what I want to hear is that, just like I said before, people look at me and just go, I just want more. And so for me, it's how are we being part of the community, and how are we moving forward. So our new tagline is community driven, because we want everybody to know that it's the community that's the part of this. So, we're back to 100% of our workforce is pretty much back in place and working. We have the new routes, we have the new ridership, but on top of that, we're very intentional about making sure that we're giving back to the community in everything that we do. So I talked about the Chief Culture Officer and what she has done even out externally also with stakeholders. And we specifically go out and look for women-owned businesses. We specifically go out and look for veteran businesses, LGBTQ plus community businesses, minority businesses. And we want to make sure not just that they're bidding on something, but they know how. That when you use federal dollars, there's a lot of crap that goes along with that. So you've got
Federal
to make
dollars
sure
are going to change, I think. Yeah.
And they change the rules in the middle of the game. So we have to make sure that we keep up with those businesses and help them to understand how they can do that. Not, you didn't get the job just because, it was too much money, or you didn't get the job because you're too small. It's, no, you didn't sign this paper right, and we've got to make sure you sign that right. So you got to do all those little things.
Yeah, we know about procurement issues here in Los Angeles. It's an issue. We've been living with it for a long time. But Greg, how are you thinking in your new measure? Were there certain kind of benchmarks that you all had as it pertains to kind of outcomes in terms of equity and engagement, participation?
One of the challenges is that sort of people want the government to be accountable if they're paying for something, and that always kind of pushes you back to how many widgets you're going to make, when you'd really more like to measure a societal outcome, So there's sort of a tension there. We did hire somebody to analyze the existing levy at the end of year 8, 8 out of 9 years through it. And she figured out that among all these different programs, 30 different programs, 46% of the elements were delivered in the 40% of the city that's the lower 2 quintiles of underserved. Like the city has a map of, dividing it into 5 quintiles. There's the highest priority equity areas and the second highest. And so 46% of our projects were in the 40% that were the top 2 priorities. We thought that was at least something. Because in the old days, right, it would have been less than 40%, right? That's what makes them historically underserved. So they got more than their fair share in a sense, but only a little more. And we weren't sure if that was enough, but it was the first time we'd ever measured it.
So that'll be something going forward. You'll be yeah, and it's good to kind of be able to kind of track something over a course of time. And Lynn, how about you?
Again, I think we're all learning and growing and figuring out what the best way to do this is. But when I first came into Metro, they said that they were doing targeted universalism. And how many of you have heard of John A. Powell and targeted universalism? Belonging and Othering Institute from Berkeley? Okay, look it up. For me as an engineer, it was a very clear methodology of how to set targets, essentially. And then look at the disparity for the overall population, break it down into demographics, and then have targeted strategies to close the disparity in every single demographic. what we did is map the areas of low income and BIPOC communities. And then we targeted money towards that. But we didn't have any KPIs. And so we have actually, I think, moved into a very non-structured way of saying whether you actually achieved any benefit or if you have started targeting money when you didn't need to into an area that already was fine. So let me give you an idea of what I'm talking about. Our parks department was told by the auditor, you haven't defined access, which is a really good transportation measure, right? Access to opportunity, access to healthcare, access to all these things that we all want to be safe when we cross the street to get to the bus and have a safe place to, right? All of these things are access. So they came back to me, the engineer, and said, we've come up with a performance metric, increase access to the targeted areas. Increase what? Access is what you were supposed to define and you didn't. And targeted areas, and then they had, just to the target areas, and then they had in italics, and aspirationally increase access to parks for the rest of the region. I'm like, but if you haven't said what increase is, you haven't said what access is, and you have, I don't know what we're measuring again. So this is a struggle, and I think it's patience is a virtue striven for by many and achieved by few. I'm part of the few. I would like to have many more of these so that you know when you're actually achieving success, because there are other communities that need help too. And I think that we're literally missing the missing middle right now if we're just focused on one, because then we are sending people into poverty without tracking it. So I feel like we need to, as a society, be able to track the progress of all of these demographics to be able to say, what's the targeted need for each of these? And have a communication with everybody. You need targeted information coming from all of these groups, not just 2 or 3. And I think it's really important to understand what's going on for everybody in the region. Yeah. Yes, and target funds to those who need it most, but have an understanding of what's going on. Because sometimes just a phone call, how you doing, is all you need. Just to know people care.
It is a hard thing. I mean, the communications and how people, it is how you get people to participate. Greg, did you want to add on to that?
Yeah, I just wanted to add a wrinkle, which is it's not as easy as channeling additional resources to more investments in underserved communities, because there are some really long-standing, high-suffering communities that got the freeway blasted through the middle of it, or they got the jail put near the community, or some sort of industrial facility that produces environmental justice impacts. And there are communities that are very skeptical that you're coming to invest. And they want to know, who's it for? And is it going to make our community better or worse? Or is it going to gentrify our community and make it better so that more yuppies come and then price us out of our apartments? So, it isn't just, channeling more investment. I think it has to be co-creation with the communities to make sure it's the investments they want and they have a sense of co-authorship.
Yeah.
Ooh, I love
Good
that.
job.
Go ahead.
I just always say it's not about building a transportation project. It's about building community with a transportation project, right? And that's exactly what you're saying. But that's the most important part of all of this, is that decisions have been made on behalf of communities, and we have to stop that.
And, here in LA County, we're reevaluating the 710 stub north in Pasadena. And after decades of fighting that project and not 1 pound of concrete ever was laid down, it was not a necessary facility. But it is interesting to see the conversation around how we're thinking about restitution. How do we think about those communities that were displaced? Where are they? What's the story? How do we think about this in a much more responsible, equitable way that's different, and it's hard, and it takes a lot of time.
Yeah. I mean, in the Portland region, Nike fought us on our transportation measure and killed it because they didn't want a local tax. On the other side of it, Phil Knight, founder of Nike, just gave $450 million just to the restitution of the neighborhood I was talking about around the I-5 corridor project.
That's
Right.
fantastic.
So you just...
Yeah. Well, I think that's what we're going through this time right now. And so let's talk about the current time. We just had our elections last week, and I think a lot of us are still trying to figure out how to think about all that and unpack it. And I just want to ask each of you, how have the results influenced or changed your thinking about your work and how you approach it? Here in Los Angeles, we're facing a lot of expectations around mega events, and there were some panels earlier today with some wonderful people. It's going to be hard. I'm going to be honest, it's going to be really hard to think about how we're going to meet our goals and our commitments to the disabled community, to all those folks who will be coming and having a certain expectation for access. But also we should do it for ourselves, right? We should do it just because we deserve it. And so what are you thinking? And Dawn, let's start with you. How have the results really influenced your thinking just in maybe your flight out to LA?
Oh, I don't know about the flight. I think for us, it's not so much that we're going to change what we do. I think that we still have to look at our sphere of influence and what we do every day, the people that we provide that service for every day. And I think that we just have to keep doing what we do, keep moving forward, and know that what we're doing is right, and make sure we're always doing it for the right reasons. And if there might be a project that mostly for us on the federal level, it would be a capital project. There might be a capital project that we either have to slow down on or look at in a different way of how we'll fund it. But as far as the service we provide, why we provide it, and how we provide it, we're just going to keep doing what we do, what our community is asking us to do, and do it in the best way we know how. Yeah. And it's just kind of what we do. Well,
and the fact that, right now, Greg, I would think that you're kind of self-funding right now in Seattle.
But there was an assumption of leveraging that money to get outside grants, and that those assumptions are going to have to be really looked at carefully. A luxury we've had by having these transportation levies is we put some of the money in as like match money to go get federal and regional money. And we've been in a very wonderful period the last 4 years with the Biden administration that's very interested in making investments in cities. And then in Washington State, we have two absolutely powerhouse Democratic senators. One is the president pro tem of the Senate, and the other one is the head of the Commerce Committee. And so we've been they've been making it rain for us, our two senators. And my agency, a 1,100 person agency, has the white collar skilled professionals to position to go get this money. And that era is about to end for us of being, a recipient of, I think we've had 150 million in federal grants in my 2 years here, new federal grants. And now it's going to be much, much leaner, and we're going to have to figure out how to do what we want to do without that.
So just to dig in, is that a prioritization process? Are you thinking what's low-hanging fruit? What's the biggest bang for the buck? Are some things gonna be put on ice? You've got this. You're in the process of recalibration.
Yeah, we had lived through this before in the first Trump administration. So the first half of the existing transportation levy was very lean on federal grants, and the second half was very rich. So our staff has been through both. But, more money means you can either do more projects or a bigger scope on the existing projects. And less money either means less projects or more narrowly defined scope. So we were prepared for this, but it's quite sobering. One thing that we are lucky about, the state has a climate cap and trade program that generates a ton of revenue.
That the voters just
that the voters just said no to a ballot measure to cancel it. You know, like gas prices went up by like 5 or 6 cents a gallon or whatever, and there was this revolt. And if that had gone away, it would have been a double hit for us. So at least the state gravy train is still coming, but the feds is going to be pretty lean.
So, wow. And thanks, Lynn, for saying that, because we have in California our cap and trade, and it's not voted on, but we haven't had anybody take a measure up to get rid of it. So that would be kind of nerve-wracking, because that does provide a whole bunch of big capital improvement projects here in the state. How about you, Lynn? How have you been thinking about the last few days?
Well, again, just my sphere of influence. You can only control what you can control. And I think just head down, keep going. Our values are our values. They're not changing in Oregon. They're not changing in Portland. They're not changing in the region to accommodate somebody's outside values that are not in line with ours. So that doesn't really change. I guess what I would just remind us all is that we used to be at 90% federal money and a 10% match on roadways. We used to be at a much higher 70, 80% on light rail construction, and now we're at 50-50 and going down. We used to have sewer money from the feds, right, 90-10 match, and we don't anymore. So this trend of the federal government not being there for infrastructure provision, this is on trend. This is not off trend. So I would just remind everybody that we have been localizing the problem down to the states and to our major metropolitan areas and forcing that conversation. And it's a very hard conversation because you're not sharing a burden anymore, right? And it is a problem because the tax rates are going up. There's a taxpayer revolt going on across the country about tax rates going up. Our governor said, 3-year moratorium when she came in. She asked every single city and every single county and every single special district, stop it for 3 years. We need to stop this and just give everybody a break and start reprioritizing at the local level because things have been so pushed down. So, to me, it's just on trend. We have to figure out how to keep going locally and find ways to be more efficient.